Let's talk a little bit about body weight and testosterone. So firstly, testosterone is very important in both men and women. The absolute amount of testosterone in women is typically much lower than that of a man. And this actually allows for testosterone to have many of the important roles inside of women without having some of the masculine effects such as a deeper voice and facial hair. However, higher testosterone in women is typically actually a very healthy thing. And given that women aren't on any sort of exogenous supplementation, the testosterone levels that they will achieve naturally will simply just provide them many of the benefits that testosterone will give them. And with that being said, what are some of these benefits? Testosterone is really the hormone of protein synthesis. And while there are many other factors and molecules that play a role in protein synthesis, testosterone is one of the very important ones. And when you think of protein synthesis, you often think of the muscle tissue. However, not only does testosterone help increase our muscle mass, but protein synthesis occurs throughout the entire body, such as the skin, many of the important organs, and inside of the brain. I won't focus so heavily on collagen tissue like the skin or your nails or even your hair, but I really want to pinpoint the effects of testosterone inside of the brain. You can think about increased protein synthesis as simply increasing our cognitive capacity. Higher rates of protein synthesis in the brain increase the strength and number of neural connections, meaning in turn they'll increase our learning and memory. And these are a few of the numerous amounts of benefits of having higher testosterone levels. However, if we're trying to maximize our natural testosterone production, actually being at a healthy body weight is extremely important. And this means not only not being too overweight, but not being too underweight as well. Being either overweight or underweight will decrease our free testosterone levels. So if we take a look at being too underweight, this is going to be because we have a lack of production of some of the hormones responsible for increasing testosterone, specifically increasing the production of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which is a hormone produced inside of the brain that starts the cascade that eventually leads to testosterone production. And there are many different hormones and neurotransmitters that actually affect the production of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Hormones that signal abundance will actually increase its production, such as insulin, which is a hormone produced after a meal, and another hormone would be leptin, which is actually a hormone produced by our fat cells. And the more fat cells we have, the more leptin we will produce. And when we go through the process of losing weight, this typically coincides with a decreased insulin production simply because we're eating less food. And as we lose fat mass, we will decrease the amount of leptin production. So these anabolic hormones will be reduced, therefore decreasing testosterone production. We'll also have an increase in catabolic hormones, most notably being something such as cortisol, which unfortunately will elevate if we're in an extreme caloric deficit or in a caloric deficit for too long. And there are also molecules associated with hunger, such as neuropeptide Y and agouti-related peptide, or AGRP, that will be increased during a caloric deficit or low body weight, and they play an inhibitory function on the production of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. So through a myriad of different precursors, the downstream production of testosterone is decreased when we're at very low body weights. And conversely, when we begin to surpass a healthy body weight and begin to put on excess fat mass, there are also mechanisms that decrease testosterone, most notably actually being the resistance to both insulin and leptin. So it is true that as we eat more and increase our body fat, we will most likely be increasing the production of leptin and insulin. And these hormones will have an anabolic effect when their signaling is proper. However, when we have an abundance of both leptin and insulin, our sensitivity to these hormones begins to decrease, which means that for the same amount of insulin, there simply is less signal being sent. And some of the cells that actually have insulin and leptin receptors begin to become resistant to these hormones. Therefore, no matter how much of these hormones we have in circulation, it is perceived at these cells that we don't have any. And if this occurs at the gonadotropin releasing hormone releasing cells, then we don't have this stimulus for gonadotropin releasing hormone production, which consequently has the same effect of not having much of these hormones at all, such as in the case of being underweight. And now this will typically occur when you have excess insulin and leptin for a very prolonged period of time. However, in the short term, increasing both of these hormones will increase testosterone production. However, there is one more issue with having excessive fat mass. There's a specific enzyme expressed within fat tissue called the aromatase enzyme. And it appears that the more fat we accumulate, the more aromatase activity we have. And what this enzyme does is actually turn circulating testosterone into estrogen. And when our estrogen levels increase, not only does this mean that we're converting more of the testosterone into estrogen instead of into free testosterone, but as estrogen levels increase, estrogen plays a similar inhibitory function on the gonadotropin releasing hormone cells. And typically, this will help ensure that we don't have supraphysiological levels of both testosterone and estrogen. However, in the case of an extremely active aromatase enzyme, it simply may leave us at a state of lower testosterone because of the elevated estrogen being a signal that there is an abundance of testosterone that we're beginning to convert it into estrogen. I also want to come back to insulin for a moment. One of the other effects of insulin is to actually decrease the production of a specific protein called sex hormone binding globulin. And what this protein will do is bind to testosterone and actually make it inactive. Therefore, even if we have higher levels of testosterone, it's not in its active form. And now at normal levels, sex hormone binding globulin actually seems to have some effects of actually transporting insulin to different cells within the body. However, an overproduction of sex hormone binding globulin will have the effect of simply decreasing the amount of free testosterone available to the cells, which is another issue that we would run into of either having low insulin production or insulin insensitivity. And the final thing I'll mention is that both of these states will typically increase the stress hormone cortisol. This is important because cortisol is actually made at the same place that testosterone is made, inside the adrenal gland, and it's actually made from the same molecule called pregnenolone. So as we increase cortisol production, we'll be stealing some of the precursors from testosterone production, meaning that the overall production of testosterone will go down. And let's say that you don't care about testosterone, but you're worried about the production of other sex steroids, such as estrogen and estradiol. Well, unfortunately, this will have the exact same effects on those hormones as well. And this is typically referred to as the cortisol steal. With that being said, I hope you learned something today, and I hope you now kind of understand why having both too low and too high body fat levels can actually cause a decrease in hormone production. Which is why maintaining a healthy body weight is one of the best fertility tools that anyone has. And not only do these hormones regulate fertility, but they regulate a myriad of cognitive and physical functions that benefit our health greatly.